Hi there. My name is Christian Nguyen, and I am a master's student currently enrolled in SPCE 683, Section 814. And today we are going to be participating in a training that discusses how to design a behavior intervention plan. I do want to apologize for the lack of webcam here, but that shouldn't hinder our training today. So with that being said, let's move on to the overview of this training. Designing a behavior intervention plan, or a BIP, is a crucial step in providing effective service delivery to clients. BIPs play an important role in outlining the goals of service delivery, are most often used to identify challenging behaviors and replace them with more functional behavior, and set a precedent for data-based decision making. Um, in this training, our objectives are as follows. We'll go over the purpose of each individual section of a BIP. We'll go over selecting behaviors to target within the BIP, designing interventions to address these behavior targets, and the importance of context and data in designing a BIP. We'll also assess what we learned throughout this training and go over a mock scenario and develop our own BIPs by the end of this training. So what is a BIP? If you have no previous knowledge of what a BIP is, it's essentially what it says it is. At its core, it is a plan for intervention that targets one or more specific behaviors. And when it comes to behavior analysis specifically, the main goal of developing a BIP is to identify behaviors that hinders one's quality of life and replace them with more functional behaviors that set them up for success. So for the bits that I am most familiar with, they can be broken down into the following sections we have here. The client's relevant personal information, identify behaviors to target for reduction, the strategies used to achieve these behavior goals, and emergency physical management protocols. We'll break down each section and how it should effectively be completed. And I've also provided a copy of the sample BIP that we'll be reviewing so that you may follow along. So moving on, we're going to start with the client information of the bit. Client information is more or less straightforward. Relevant information such as the client's name and date of birth are included, followed by who is or will be part of the client's treatment team. For the clinic I work in, this includes behavior technicians, BCBAs, occupational therapists, and speech language pathologists as well. In the visual that we have provided on this slide, it also kind of details the purpose of this plan, which again is to help, in this case, Jane Doe, decrease the rate at which she engages in certain challenging behaviors. Um, Short and sweet, we'll go ahead and move forward to the target behavior section here. So target behaviors follow the client's personal information, as you can see on the sample bit provided. As previously stated, the target behaviors are a list of behaviors identified to be reduced and replaced by more functional behavior. Behaviors should be identified following the completion of necessary processes, such as assessment through direct observations, reviewing records, and informal interviews with stakeholders such as parents, caregivers, even school staff. Furthermore, behaviors should not only be identified, but defined in objective and observable terms so that it can be reliably measured across various staff. Definitions for behavior should also include examples and non-examples and terms that define an instance of behavior. So when it happens and when it stops. The rates of behavior are also included within the section. We'll move that in a second, so that progress can be monitored and modifications to the plan can be made if necessary. So these visuals here provide some examples of target behaviors to be reduced as well as their definitions. If you'd like, you can go ahead and pause here or refer to your sample bit to read through these definitions. Something to make note of is that the examples and non-examples are super important. Um, Not only does the example show when an instance of behavior should be recorded, the non-example shows when a behavior might look like the target behavior, but doesn't necessarily mean it should be measured as the target behavior. So give you guys a second to look at that and we'll move along here. And here is the table for some examples of the rates of behavior. Um, It includes the period of which data collection occurred, how many days data collection occurred, and the average rate of behavior that occurs each day. Um, so, for example, uh, if we were to use some simpler numbers, let's say September for grabbing had an instances of two grabbing behaviors per day. Over a course of 14 days, that might equal to about 28 instances, if my math is correct, over the course of that measurement period. So just dividing the amount of total instances of behavior by the number of active data collection days, and you get your average instances of behavior per day. So moving forward here, we are going to be discussing the strategies to address our target behaviors. Um, so strategies to address target behaviors are shown in this section, and it's at this point where you begin to see that the BIP is somewhat templated. It's important to note here that clinics, schools, and other organizations are likely to format their BIPs differently, depending on a variety of factors such as insurance documentation and contextual fit. Following the rates of target behavior, you can see that the methods used to assess problem behavior, as we previously discussed, including parent interviews and direct assessments. BIPs are not only accessed by the treatment teams of clients, but also stakeholders. So it's important to remember that these steps are outlined for transparency and clarity for both clients and stakeholders, even if they are templated for you and you don't have to think too hard about this part. Um, Proactive and reactive strategies to adjust behaviors are included in the section. Um, More commonly, these are your antecedent and consequent strategies. In describing these strategies for clarity's sake, antecedent strategies are those implemented before maladaptive behavior occurs so that it may be prevented. Consequent strategies are implemented following the observation of behavior. You may notice, and we'll move on to visuals for antecedent consequence strategies, but you may notice that the antecedent strategies are a general list of strategies to implement, while the consequence strategies are listed by behavior and by function that maintains that behavior. Antecedent strategies do take the functions of behavior into account, but are generally not assigned to any specific behavior simply because the behavior hasn't happened yet. So moving on here, we have some examples of both proactive and reactive strategies. Rapport building and functional communication training are great examples of strategies that keep the functions of behavior in mind without directly addressing them. If, for example, the client within this BIP has a history of engaging in physical aggression behaviors to gain access to preferred items, rapport building can be used to provide access to those items non-contingently, or through prompting functional requests for those items before maladaptive behavior occurs. Consequently, if you are trying to address physical aggression that is maintained by access to tangibles, you might try to offer alternative choices if the first choice is not available. It's important to note that just as we use data to inform and select the most relevant behaviors to target for reduction, we also use the client's data to inform the strategies we use to address behavior. Taking note of a client's preferences is a great example of this. In denying access to something dangerous, maybe like a pair of scissors, for example, you might use your knowledge of the client's preferences to try and prompt an alternative choice for bubbles or toy cars. Um, Lastly, whether it's an antecedent or consequent strategy, the strategy must be written out in a way where novel staff can reliably replicate the steps to implement these strategies. Just like being clear and objective when defining our target behaviors, we must also be clear in how we implement strategies to address those target behaviors. So the last section of our BIP is the emergency protocols. Um, this part also includes other observed behaviors that are not necessarily being targeted for reduction. Um, This last section of the bid is the most heavily templated part of the plan. Like I said, it first details any additional maladaptive behaviors that have been observed but are not currently being targeted, most often due to the fact that these behaviors already occur at a low enough rate and therefore do not require intervention. Similarly to our previously targeted behaviors, the behaviors in this section are also defined using objective and observable terms. Following this, the BIP is templated to include a number of emergency physical management strategies that may be used to address serious behaviors that are a danger to oneself or others. These physical management strategies do require training and therefore a certification of their own before being able to implement these strategies during services. So we won't go over these specific physical management strategies in this training, but in a different one. Um, It is also a must to collaborate with all stakeholders and members of the treatment team to obtain consent for the use of these strategies and to ensure that the strategies are implemented reliably and with fidelity. To summarize these strategies, they range from physical restraint to transport and to releases of grabs or bites. Um, so there was a lot of information there, but the key takeaways are this. Writing and language should be objective so that multiple people can reliably implement the bit. Behaviors targeted for reduction should be clearly defined with examples, non-examples, and with definitions for when the behavior begins and ends. Strategies used to address behavior should also be clearly defined, should consider the client's contextual fit, and should always consider the functions that maintain challenging behavior. Designing the BIP should be driven by data gathered from direct observations, records reviews, interviews, and other methods relevant to service delivery. Organizations who deliver ABA services often use a template. Although the template is useful in designing a BIP, it is important to be thorough for documentation purposes and for use and review across staff and stakeholders. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at an example scenario here. A client, John Smith, is enrolled in ABA services by his parents, Joe and Mary Smith, following a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder and an evaluation that indicated that he was developmentally 2 years behind his typically developing peers. John was born on September 1st, 2020, and was diagnosed with ASD on March 5th, 2023. John's BCBA, Chris McNeil, is tasked with submitting a BIP to insurance within a month of John's enrollment so that it may justify his services. During the initial meeting between Chris and John's parents, it is explained that John often hits his parents when they take away his tablet for the day. They describe the aggression as with a closed fist that is strong enough to cause bruising, and Chris also discovers during his direct observation of client sessions that John engages in this aggression when it is time to leave the clinic's gym space. Aside from his tablet and the gym space, John's other interests include coloring and drawing and listening to music. Regarding his communication skills, John currently speaks in 2 to 3 word phrases and independently imitates most phrases. So using this example scenario, let's format a mock bit for John to be implemented by his technicians during client sessions. So let's start with the client's personal information. This is the point where I'd like you to think about how we might fill out this bit. You do not have to follow the direct format that the sample bit shows, but just to kind of get your brain thinking about how you might fill this out and why. So with the client information, it should be pretty straightforward here. We fill in the client's name, date of birth, their parents and guardians' names, and any relevant treatment team members that we know of. So we have John Smith, his birthday, Joe and Mary Smith, and BCBA Chris McNeil. Pretty straightforward there. Let's move on to selecting and defining target behaviors. Again, I'll give you a second to pause and think about what behaviors we might include in this BIP from the example scenario. And pretty clearly, it should just be the physical aggression here. I define physical aggression as John balling his hands into fists and striking someone with enough force to cause redness or bruising. So this kind of goes into the topographical, I believe is a topographical definition of the physical aggression. So basically what it looks like. The example is that John is denied access to his tablet after playing it on for a few hours. John screams and begins hitting his parents. Pretty straightforward there. Non-example, John gives a hard fist bump to his dad after they celebrate the completion of a game. So it kind of fits the definition of physical aggression, but it isn't necessarily considered physical aggression because they were celebrating the completion of a game. So it kind of considers context as well. Excuse me. With the termination of behavior, it is indicated by John retracting his hand away from the other person so that it breaks contact. Another instance of physical aggression occurs when John makes contact again while using a closed fist. So this is just for measurement purposes to see the frequency and rate at which John engages in this physical aggression. Here we have an example of the rates of target behaviors. Simply put, within October, there was an average of 5 instances of physical aggression each day over the course of 20 days. So that amounts to about 100 total physical aggressions. 100 divided by 20 gives you 5 per day. Okay, let's go ahead and think about some antecedent consequence strategies for John here. I'll give you a second to pause and think about that. So the proactive strategies here, again, I included rapport building during the first 15 minutes of session, as well as throughout the session, engage and play with John and his preferred toys to build rapport and gain instructional control. I also include a functional communication training here. So throughout the session, we're modeling functional communication so that John has the opportunity to express his wants and needs. Um, Pretty straightforward there. You can go ahead and pause and look through the entire strategies here. But moving forward, in terms of consequence strategies for physical aggression, if we remember, it is primarily used to gain access to some kind of tangible here. So we're taking the physical aggression, we're naming out some replacement behaviors that we'd like to see, and we're addressing the function of access directly. So upon observing the physical aggression, we're going to adjust our body positioning by stepping away to maintain a safe distance and block additional not grab attempts, excuse me, physical aggression attempts. We would then prompt some functional communication for John to request the item if it is available. And if it's not available, we try to redirect some other available preferred items, either by bringing the items to him or by providing the choices vocally. And lastly, any additional maladaptive behaviors. Um, for this scenario, I didn't include any. Again, this part is heavily templated, so it is pretty straightforward. If there were any additional maladaptive behaviors, we'd simply list them here and define them. And just be aware that we wouldn't be necessarily tracking them until they reach a high enough frequency there. And that's it. We now have the core of a BIP that can be implemented by the treatment team. With that, BIPs are an essential part of a client treatment plan when it comes to ABA services. The overarching goal of utilizing BIPs is to target challenging behaviors and replace them with the skills that clients can use to promote their own success and achieve their goals. I hope you found this training useful so that you can apply it to your own practices and as an inspiring BCBA. For more resources, please feel free to access my digital toolkit using the link below. And for any additional questions, you can also reach me at my email below. Thank you.